From the Arizona Daily Star and Tucson.com, this is the Wildcast.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Wildcast podcast. I'm your host, Justin Spears, here with Michael Lev, and it's officially the college football season, 2023, officially underway. We got Arizona and NAU kicking off on Saturday this week. We're going to have another podcast leading up to it, previewing Saturday's game along with the other games going around the Pac-12. And it's an exciting time. I always love college football season because that means we get to do 2 podcasts every single week. And for all of you listeners who have been clamoring for an episode, well, we're back. We're going to be more routine, have a couple of these per week. And if you're not a loyal listener and you're new to this whole thing, please be sure to subscribe to the Wildcast podcast, located wherever you get your podcasts. We're talking Apple, Spotify, other platforms, and leave us a rating and a review. We greatly appreciate that. Lev, happy football season, man.
You as well. At least 2 podcasts a week.
Oh, yeah.
You don't know what's coming up, but we don't know exactly what's coming down the pike here, but we're working on some things to maybe do even more. No promises, but
yeah.
Minimally, we will do our sort of review and preview. We don't really have anything to review right now. I guess we can review training camp a little bit. We're going to answer some questions, but it's very exciting to have football back in our lives. I was out in Las Cruces.
I was like, you got a taste of it, man.
Yeah, this past Saturday, went to visit some old friends. JB Brown saw us on the sideline during warm-ups, came over and gave me a big, sweaty hug. Isaiah Rutherford was very fired up and happy to talk to us, myself and colleague Brian Peterson from AZ Desert Swarm. Isaiah had the biggest play probably in the entire game, pick 6, to kind of put things away for UMass, coached by Don Brown. He was only here 1 year, but he will always be, Jed Fish's first defensive coordinator, and he made a big impression, I think, on everybody, certainly in the media, with just kind of his charisma and his kind of old school way of going about things. So that was fun. Week 0 in the books, week 1 ahead, NAU, Saturday night, Arizona Wildcat football is back.
Revenge game. Remember that. It's a revenge game for Arizona.
For those 9 guys who are still on the team, who actually played in that game. Yeah, well, I mean, the coaching staff, too. I'm sure there will be a lot of like, oh, we don't talk about that. That was 2 years ago, etc. But, man, kind of a wake-up call. Maybe a little bit. Like man, we can't just roll the balls out here. We got a long way to go to build this thing up. And to Jed Fish's credit, he's done so. I mean, he has transformed this roster in short order. It's easier to do it nowadays with the transfer portal, but still, I mean, you have to get the right guys, and you have to attack it strategically, and I think they've done both of those things.
When that game happened, and we heard the NAU coaches running out into the hallways of the the Arizona Stadium press box. Yeah, we own this state.
With some other colorful words thrown in there.
It's personal. We've heard that. Kind of mocking Arizona, and NAU. I mean, they did their victory lap in that press box, and rightfully so. I mean that is probably maybe the most historic win in program history, I would say. I mean, it was.
When was the last time it happened? Like 1932.
1932. We're talking about the Great Depression, Lev. The last time Arizona lost to NAU.
Sent Arizona fans into a Great Depression, didn't it?
To me, that's worse than 70-7 Territorial Cup. You don't lose to NAU, right?
We've had that debate. I think that 70-7 was worse, but it was pretty close.
Yeah, I think it was because there were fans in attendance. Where 70-7, it was during the pandemic, so no fans were there. But you certainly felt the humiliation on Twitter all throughout the night until Kevin Sumlin got fired. But I don't know. You just don't lose to NAU, and that was 2 years ago. And to me, that really showed. Okay. One, I mean, the coaching definitely could have been a lot better in the NAU game because even if you're playing with a bunch of walk-ons, you don't lose to NAU. Especially the Lumberjacks, they were down to their third-string quarterback, who's a true freshman. Like, there were so many variables in that game that just Arizona had no business losing that game. But it showed everyone just how really low this program is. And it was all the way down to the studs. And brick by brick, we've seen Jed Fish and his staff really bolster the roster. And there was a blueprint to this whole plan. Okay, let's get the offense going first. Let's build up the offense so that way we can show defensive players that are maybe looking for a new home, hey, when you come to Arizona, you're not going to be winning these 10-9, 10-7 type of ball games, right? That only happens if you're playing with the Iowa Hawkeyes who have no offense. You want to come to a situation to where you can trust the offense to play complementary football. And so they got Jacob Cowing. They got T-Mac. They got on the offensive line Jonas Avianea. At tight end, Tanner McLaughlin. The offense was they really hit a home run on a lot of the additions on offense last year. And then they elevated to being one of the top offenses, not only in the Pac-12, but in the country. And then now that gives you something to work with. Now you can go to the Justin Flows in the transfer portal from Oregon, Daniel Haimuli, all the other defensive linemen that they were able to acquire and say, we need your help. We need you guys to come in, stop the run, help us transform this defense. And then this program can really take flight if you do so. And they were able to get the guys that they feel are the right fits. And now defense is better. It goes along with the offense that they return a lion's share of the starters. And I think now the blueprint or the foundation is that Arizona can build on their 5-7 season and possibly even go to a bowl game for the first time in 6 years, which I think is the case.
Yeah, long way to go, obviously, to get to that point, but need to take care of business right off the bat. I think, there's little doubt as to who's going to win this game based on just the way the program has progressed over the last 2 years. But hey, you better take it seriously, right? If there's any lesson to be learned from the last time is you better be focused, you better be locked in. You never know what can happen. So we'll see. I mean, NAU was picked 9th in the 12-team Big Sky in the preseason poll. So, their program is kind of down a little bit. I think it will be interesting to see what the vibe is like at the stadium. I mean, Jed Fish has been pushing so hard every single time he talks or tweets or whatever about filling up the stadium. Are we going to get 50,000 plus for NAU on 7:00 on a Saturday night? Maybe not. It's not like USC coming in or Washington or Oregon as far as a marquee matchup. But hey, it's been a while. It is a fun and exciting team, as you mentioned. I mean, that 2021 season, the offense was not good. I mean, it was hard to watch sometimes. And even last year, even when they lost, they were putting up a lot of points. Yeah. Like, let's look at the Washington game, for example. Like, they were struggling on defense. They had no pass rush against Michael Penix, but they kept coming. They kept scoring. They made it a 3-point game late. I mean, they were competitive. They were entertaining. So, no matter what happens, you're going to get a good product out there on the field, a lot of points. I think one of the things we'll track over the course of the season is how many points does the other team score. Yeah. Because as you mentioned, that's been the focal point. That's the area that they attacked this offseason after working on the offense the previous offseason. Can they improve enough in that area to win more games than they lose, go to a bowl game? There were a number of situations last year where Arizona would get into like these 3rd and 4, 3rd and 5 situations, and they really struggled to make tackles. And you saw running backs get those extra yards and continue to move the chains. And I think now that Arizona has addressed the rushing defense, I think maybe the Wildcats now can take that next step. Because to me, rushing defense, that was absolutely abysmal. And that, to me, that was the biggest difference between Arizona being a 5-7 team and a 6-6 team. I always go back to that Cal game because Arizona, they had the Golden Bears in a vice, and they had such a handle on that game. But what happened? A couple of things went against Arizona. Cal got the momentum, and Jaden Ott, their running back, was just running all over Arizona like a madman, and Arizona ends up losing that game. That is that one game last season that you can pinpoint and say that Arizona could have won that game, and the biggest reason why is because they couldn't stop the run. And that didn't just happen against Cal. That happened against other teams throughout the season too. They gave up over 300 yards in 3 games. 300 yards on the ground in 3 games last season. That's really unacceptable. Now, the big guys that they've added, are they going to be the ultimate run stoppers? Maybe, but not. But they're also going to be making the plays that don't show up on the box score
like being what CEO Nafoa Katotoa, the Indiana transfer, he says we have to be dancing bears. We have to be big, we have to be light on our feet, and we have to take up a bunch of space so that way the Jacob Manus, the Justin Flows, and the Daniel Haimulis can really go to work and wreak havoc and start racking up these tackles.
That is the big question. How are those big guys going to play? Is the rotation going to matter? Are they just big bodies, or are they big bodies who can play football? And frankly, we don't know yet, right? I mean, a lot of these guys are relatively unproven. They don't have a lot of stats. They don't have a lot of snaps in their backgrounds in college football. Like Bill Norton, for example. I mean, he comes from Georgia. That's great. He obviously knows what it takes to win in college football, but he didn't play that much for the Bulldogs. So, it kind of remains to be seen whether a lot of these guys live up to their billing. I don't know if we're really going to know that much from the NAU game. We'll find out a lot more in week 2 when they face an SEC team in Mississippi State and a Mississippi State team that's going to run the ball a lot more than they did under Mike Leach, with a new offensive system that's kind of more similar to what Arizona runs. That's it. I mean, because if you can just do a decent enough job against the run, then you can force opponents to become one-dimensional, and then you can go to your dollar package and you can dial up some blitzes. When you know what's coming, it's a lot easier to play defense. And I think what the 3 tenets for Johnny Nansen: stop the run, minimize big plays, and take the ball away.
Yeah.
Right? So
they took the ball away quite a bit last year, but
better.
most of it was forced fumbles.
Better.
Still last in interceptions.
Yeah. And there were supposed to be more picks. Remember, we talked about how when you play zone, you're watching the quarterback more than when you play man, and you have your eyes on the QB versus kind of trailing the receiver. By the way, Isaiah Rutherford's pick 6 that we mentioned earlier, zone.
Really?
Yeah, they were playing zone. He said it was a clear out, like his man cleared out on that side to open up an out pattern, and he was in zone, was watching the quarterback, picked the ball off, so,
That's great.
So Don Brown does play zone every now and again.
We actually have some questions here, and then I'll also, bring up some interesting storylines as we go into the weeds of game week here. One of our mailbag questions, and we're going to do this every single week, and I'll also type these up too, because we appreciate reader/listener engagement, and we know that a lot of Arizona fans are diehards and are really curious about the team. So we'll do our best to maintain that engagement with you guys all throughout the season. But one of our first questions comes from Brad Malone, and he asks, with 16 teams in the Big 12 next year, how do you think it will impact U of A's football schedule in the conference? Besides ASU, are there other teams you think Cats will be guaranteed to play every year? I think BYU is a safe pick.
I think so. There was a lot of time in the car with myself and Brian Peterson, who's kind of a sports nerd like we are in a big way. We drove 4 hours each way, so we spent a good chunk of time trying to break down scheduling for both football and basketball in the Big 12. And what we concluded, and I'm not reporting this is speculation, but there's some logic to it, is maybe you go in pods of four that are kind of regionally based. So Arizona would play ASU, Utah, and BYU every year. Okay? That leaves 3 other pods of 4, and then you'd play 2 teams from each of those pods each year. That way you never go more than 2 years without playing everyone in the conference, and you never go more than 4 years without hosting everyone in the conference.
I like that.
Right? So that would be 9 conference games, 3 in your pod, 2 each from the 3 other pods. In basketball, and he didn't ask about basketball, but in basketball, if they played 20 games and you have 15 opponents, you play 5 opponents twice each year and 10 opponents once. And that adds up to 20 games. And we don't know if they're going to play 20 games.
Sure. It
makes sense to play more conference games. I mean, what's the point of building these super conferences? But yeah, the scheduling piece is one that is still kind of out there. And I did ask Dave Hickey about this earlier in the week, and he said he didn't think there would be divisions, which I find disappointing because I like divisions, but it seems like the trend in college football is to go away from division so that you can ensure having your two best teams in the conference championship game for whatever that's worth.
So would Colorado be a part of the Iowa State pod?
Right, yeah. Maybe Colorado, Oklahoma State, Kansas State.
Okay.
Maybe, and then Iowa State might be in the kind of the eastern wing with Cincinnati, Central Florida, and West Virginia.
Okay.
Maybe. And then that would leave the Texas teams as their own pod.
Yep.
TCU, Baylor, Texas Tech, and Houston.
Does each pod get a cool name?
I don't know.
Like the Four Corner pod, the Lone Star pod.
I like what you're thinking here. I like where we're going with this.
Truck Stop pod.
Sure. I mean, that might apply to a lot of the pods, honestly. But no, hey, I'm all for it. I think they should totally embrace something
like that.
of that nature. Or maybe like, I don't know, famous historical figures in the Big 12. If such a thing exists, I guess, with Texas and Oklahoma leaving, that makes it kind of weird.
Yeah.
But, no, yeah, I like that. I like that idea, sure.
All right, our next one comes from the Dude 1121. He asks, discuss the quarterback room. Not really asking, more of like a statement, but we will discuss the quarterback room. I thought it was easy going into this training camp. I thought it was Takario Davis and Ephesians Prysock. Ephesians being the surefire starter between the two, right? But they're both built the same. I think Ephesians says some of the guys refer to them as like the Twin Towers because, I mean, they're built like small forwards and they're playing corners. But I think corner might be kind of up for discussion here besides Ephesians Prysock because Dylan Wyatt, this 60-year transfer who originally started his career at Illinois, played for Lovie Smith, and then got hurt and ended up into the portal or ended up finishing his collegiate career at Cal Poly and was just kind of just hanging around, finished up his career at Cal Poly, and then got an opportunity to play at Arizona thanks to his connections from cornerbacks coach John Richardson, who recruited him out of high school. And Johnny Nansen also got a recommendation from an assistant at Ole Miss who said, yeah, this Dylan Wyatt kid's the real deal. If you're looking for a guy, you should bring him on. And he's been really ascending in training camp over the last couple weeks of camp. He was a guy who was among the guys who would get interceptions and a lot of pass breakups too. Next thing you know, we see him getting some love in the starting lineup. So maybe Dylan Wyatt, being this 6th-year savvy veteran, maybe he's the guy that it's the opposite of Ephesians Prysock. And if you have Takario Davis as kind of a reserve, I think that's a really good problem for Arizona. Having a guy like that, the potential that he shows, I mean, this is a starter, and he's on the bench in a reserve role. But he's still going to get a lot of playing time, along with other defensive backs. And I know we'll probably talk about safety here, but Arizona loves that dollar package. They love utilizing those 7 defensive backs when needed. So even though, Takario Davis may not start, he's still going to have a very prominent role in the secondary. And another guy who's probably my favorite defensive back out of the group is Jay Avion Celestine, who's 5'9" and 180 pounds. And he's like a honey badger in the sense that he just doesn't care. He's so fearless. I mean, he's not like a Tyrann Mathieu type honey badger, but he's
not the position he plays, but the kind of the way he carries himself.
Very fearless. He talks smack, and it doesn't matter what body type you are, whether you're Jacob Cowing, where you're more of a slot receiver, or if you're a T-Mac, where you're 6'5" and you're 8 inches taller than him. He does a really good job covering multiple body types, and that's the kind of guy that you want. So I think it's safe to say that Arizona, I think they have 4 guys that they can rely on at the cornerback position, really. And then I didn't even mention Charles Yates, the junior college guy. So
yeah, the emergence of Dylan Wyatt was one of the better stories, I think, of the offseason, of training camp. Guy they brought in from Cal Poly. I guess he played at Illinois before that, and I heard that he was more athletic than they thought he would be. They knew he would be a veteran presence, but he's been a little bit better than they thought, and I think they like the idea of having someone a little bit more experienced, to kind of balance things out instead of throwing, two true sophomores out there at that position where you're often kind of out on your own on an island. Even in a zone scheme, it can be a little, hairy out there on the perimeter. Like you said, having Takario Davis as a third corner, it's a good problem to have. You can be a little bit more patient with him and his development, and he played in that dollar package last year, so I would expect him to be involved in that as well. And Javian Celestine, big time, coming on in a major way. I remember this one play during camp where Jacob Cowing was running like a streak route, some sort of a fly down the sideline, and Celestine G7, he ran stride for stride with Cowing. I don't know how many other players on the team could do that. Guessing not many. Maybe Speedy Luke, who doesn't play defense.
Yeah.
So that really impressed me, and he's kind of feisty too. What they do with the nickel corner is a little different than some others. Like it's kind of a, maybe a slightly bigger guy who they want someone who can be physical a little bit in the box. But I could see him being a nickel corner in a lot of different schemes.
Yeah.
In the future, with his size and what he brings to the table. Hopefully we'll get to talk to him at some point during the season, because I'm sure he has a very interesting story in a lot of ways. But I think they're okay there.
Yeah.
And that was an area that I was a little bit concerned about going into the season, with Traden Stukes moving from standard corner to the nickel spot, and also Christian Roland Wallace transferring, someone who had another year of eligibility.
I was thinking about him at the nickelback slot. He'd be perfect, right? I mean, I think Traden Stukes is going to do just fine there, but Ciro seemed like an NFL or a safety at the NFL level, so putting him in that nickelback slot almost seemed too perfect. And now I don't even think he's starting at USC.
Yeah, I mean, he played 31 defensive snaps in the first game, had the highest grade according to PFF of any USC defensive player.
Good for him.
In the game. So
heck yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think we all like Zero.
Yeah.
We're, kind of
hoping he does
rooting
well
for him, yeah. In a sense. But he's an interesting one, and we're not going to spend too much time talking about non-Arizona players here on the podcast, but I just wonder if the NFL people might look at him as a safety too. We've talked about that. He's big. He's physical. I don't know how fast he's going to run.
Yeah.
But anyway, on to the next question.
All right. How does the defensive line look? What do you think the starting lineup and rotation will look like? I mean, we already kind of talked about it, the number of guys that they can use. Johnny Nansen says 8 or 9 guys potentially for.
I could see even more than 10. That, honestly. Yeah.
I think starting-wise, I think one guy who's for sure going to start is Taylor Upshaw. Who is the transfer from Michigan/Colorado, was actually very productive at Michigan. And I think when you're productive at a program like Michigan, you come down to Arizona, you're probably going to be productive again. So I like Taylor Upshaw starting at the edge. And then in the interior, Tyler Manoa, transfer from UCLA, he seems like a mainstay. Bill Norton, I really wasn't sure he was going to be a starter, more like a guy who would rotate in and out. Because, you still have Tia Savea there, but Tia Savea is always hurt. He's never really available in practice to get those reps. And Bill Norton has actually been a guy where, he's big, but he's finding out a way to get in the backfield and utilize his size to take up a lot of space. So Bill Norton, Tyler Manoa, those two are your interior guys. And then one player who I did not even think would even get to this spot, and that's Isaiah Ward. And he is a redshirt sophomore?
Redshirt
freshman.
Yeah.
And he's a little undersized, right? He's 6'5", 225 pounds.
Weight-wise, he's undersized.
He's undersized, but he's got length, athleticism, speed. We've seen him get in the backfield and kind of bat down a couple of passes, and I almost feel like he should add the Dikembe Mutombo finger wag to his celebration arsenal. But, I mean, he is a guy who can get to the quarterback, and they love this guy. I mean, he's been able to really ascend, and he went from – he might be third string. I mean, during spring ball, he was a guy that was just kind of running with the threes. Now we're looking at him being a potential starter on this defense. And I think it goes to show, man, those several months, he really worked his ass off, and he really got to a really good point now, to the point where he's going to start. So that, to me, those 4 guys are going to be your starting defensive line, in my opinion.
I would agree, and they are going to play a lot of guys. The fact that Isaiah Ward, at least for now, has kind of leapfrogged Russell Davis and Sterling Lane is really impressive.
Really?
For Isaiah, because he was kind of behind those guys to start out with. He was behind them last year in terms of, when you look at how much they actually ended up playing, and both Sterling Lane and Russell Davis surpassed that threshold to lose a year, whereas Isaiah Ward was, in the 4 games or less category to preserve his red shirt. So it just shows you kind of what they thought of those guys a year ago and how things have changed a little bit. Russell Davis, I think, is going to be part of that second wave. Sterling Lane might be at times as well. Tai Yungalele is another one to keep an eye on. It's part of that second group. You mentioned Sio earlier. I'll leave the last name pronunciation to you on that one, Justin.
Nafoa Gatotoa.
Very good. Well done. So, again, it's a lot of new faces. Like, it's this blend of transfers and young guys. Most of the guys who are returning are sophomores or younger. So you don't have to play those guys like an inordinate number of snaps.
Yeah. Right.
You can kind of bring them along. They can learn from the older guys. You can rotate in and out. You can develop them. I like the recruiting strategy, the roster building strategy when it came to the defensive line. It was clearly like the number one area that they were targeting when they went into this past offseason.
Soulman asks, speaking of defensive line, whatever happened to Jason Harris? Well, we all know he's no longer a part of the program, not listed on the roster. Tay Brown, the freshman linebacker, has taken over that number 6 number. Kind of a disappointing situation. His dad was an all Pac-10 linebacker for Desert Swarm. Sean Harris, his mother, Sharon Walker, now Sharon Harris. She was an Arizona women's basketball standout. And obviously, older brother Jalen, now killing it with Chicago Bears in preseason. He was a captain for the Arizona Wildcats. So Jason was always kind of destined to be an Arizona Wildcat. It didn't work out the first time. He ended up going to Colorado, but then transferring to Arizona. And I think that he just kind of really fell behind. The additions that they got were really good. Not saying that Jason isn't a good defensive end or can be a really good pass rusher, but man, they have a lot of talent up there, and they got that over the last couple of years. If this was maybe, if Arizona had the defensive line from a couple of years ago this season, I could see Jason Harris maybe having a more prominent role, but I just think it's the guys that they have.
He was a 4-star recruit.
Yeah.
Out of the state of Arizona.
All-American.
Who went to Colorado initially, was brought back here by Jed Fish and his staff as they tried to kind of, they're trying to put a fence up around the state, right? His brother was here. His brother did really well. You got that number 1 jersey. Was a mainstay under multiple coaching staffs at Arizona. And with Jason, it just never really came together.
Yeah.
He's very tall. Legit 6'7", maybe 6'8". Sometimes it's hard for guys who are that big to play low enough on a consistent basis. You really have to be a special athlete. And as we watched camp, this in August, he just wasn't out there.
Yeah.
With the 1s, the 2s, or the 3s, really, all that much. He'd get some playing time. Maybe with that third unit. And he did pretty well.
He did.
When he got in there going up against, the third team offensive tackles, but they obviously didn't see enough out of him to put him ahead of the Isaiah Ward, Sterling Lane, Russell Davis types that we talked about. They also brought in Oren Patu from Cal, who's in that edge mix. That's the idea, right? Is to bring in talent and have them compete and kind of have the best man win. And Jason, he was unable to win that competition. As a result, he's not on the roster. It'll be interesting to see what he does, whether he goes back in the transfer portal to play football. Maybe he decides to play basketball because he was a really good basketball player in high school as well. It's just too bad that one didn't work out.
I have some mailbag questions for the columnists because I know you're chock full of opinions, Lev. Who starts at middle linebacker? Justin Flo or Daniel Haimuli?
Okay.
That was one of my last big training camp stories.
You heard the comment, right? Neck and neck between the two of them. I'd say for the most part, when they would run out on the field for the first time, the first team defense, it was Daniel Haimuli who was getting the call. So that's my prediction. But I think both of them are going to play. I think it's going to be about a 50-50 split over the first couple games, maybe 3 games, and then maybe you make a decision at that point and decide to go with one over the other. Or maybe you stick with that, and maybe that's a good thing for Justin Flo to not play as many snaps because, as we know, the biggest thing that held him back up at Oregon was he couldn't stay healthy. He suffered a couple different injuries, couldn't stay on the field. So maybe, having a little bit of a lesser load will help him. Interesting guy. We're recording this before Jed Fish's first Monday press conference of the season. I'm sure there will be some questions
no doubt
about what he thinks about Flo, who, he's got this huge personality. He's obviously strong and athletic. Was an absolute monster recruit for Oregon at the time, but it hasn't come together for him. And this is a really big year for him to put up some good film if he wants to play in the NFL someday.
He's got it tatted on his hand, right? You got to make it to the NFL if you have it tatted on your hand.
Is that a rule?
Yeah, man.
Okay.
You have to. Another question for you, Lev, and this is kind of regarding the school up north, or as Chuck Cecil will call them, the Scummies. He doesn't refer to them by Arizona State University, refers to them by something else. But they're on a self-imposed postseason ban this year because of a recruiting investigation that took place from the Herm Edwards era that also included former Arizona Wildcat Antonio Pierce and others, where they broke several recruiting violations. Even during a global pandemic, they were hosting recruits at their facilities, which at the time, in the pre-vax era, at that time, it was just a big no-no to host any recruits. But ASU is in a lot of trouble right now. And, I thought that they would get reprimanded in some way as a program, but a self-imposed postseason ban, announcing that, 5 days or a week before your season opener, I think is just not really a good look. And I feel so bad for the current guys because, Kenny Dillingham was not a part of the staff. A lot of these players were not a part of ASU when all of this went down. Punishing them, I think, is, I don't know, it's just very rough. And I think that Ray Anderson should be reprimanded more than anyone.
I thought we had evolved to a point with these NCAA punishments where they were trying to get away from, inflicting those upon the current coaches and players if they weren't involved in the previous transgressions. That seemed to be like a concerted effort on the part of NCAA enforcement. And clearly in this particular instance, that did not happen. This decision was made by the ASU administration.
President Michael Crow.
To self-impose this bowl ban. And, they might not have made a bowl game anyway, but it really sucks for this year's team to have this dropped on them 5 days before their season is going to start. It's really rotten. It's really unfair. I know that, there are a lot of U of A fans are not going to have sympathy for anything that happens to ASU. That's negative. But I think we feel that in here, having been through that kind of situation. I had a basketball team when I was covering USC that had one of those self-imposed bans. Basketball had that here. It just kind of puts this gray cloud over the season. It's not as fun. There isn't as much to look forward to. I don't know whether those players have the option to transfer at this point. It's a very, very late in the going. The season's already started. So yeah, really unfortunate set of circumstances. Very questionable decision on the part of Michael Crow and ASU.
Does this change anything at quarterback, do you think, with Jaden Rashada and all them? And
like
Trent
maybe
Bourget?
you play him more because you kind of have nothing to lose. Like let him go out there and
maybe
learn
figure
and
out
make
a way
mistakes.
to get 4 games in and just redshirt him and play Trent Bourget the rest of the way.
Maybe that could be a strategy too.
Yeah.
I don't know. Might depend on how he's doing. But didn't Houston do that a couple years ago? They basically like shut a lot of guys down after 4 games. Dana Holgerson.
Yeah.
Yeah, and sort of was like planning ahead. I mean, you can't really tank in college football. I mean, there's no real incentive to do it. There's no draft pick that you earn at the end of the season. But as a sort of a program, from a program building standpoint, it's something to think about, you know?
No doubt. All right, well, that'll do it for this early week episode of the Wildcast podcast. Thank you guys for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and comment wherever you get your podcast. We'll be back later on the week previewing Arizona versus NAU.